Hi, good afternoon, everyone. This is Chris Spell, dialing in from eBuilder. Thank you very much for joining us for the 7 Habits of Highly Effective Projects. What this webinar is all about some of the best-in-class practices that owners do differently from the rest of the pack that allow their projects to not only succeed, but deliver the kinds of results we all hope for. With that, let's just jump in. According to McKinsey & Company and Accenture, capital projects still suffer some major hurdles. McKinsey paints a pretty difficult picture where they're talking about, from a capital program perspective, 98% of projects suffer cost overruns of more than 30%, and many are late. Accenture paints a little bit of a different picture, but still difficult, is that less than 1/3 of capital projects adhere to their approved budget, and that's within a margin of contingency of 25%. Even smaller group within the owner community report projects being within 10% of what they originally budgeted at. So when you think about those conditions, you've got growth and you've got some project challenges. It's really no wonder that from an owner perspective, according to A.T. Kearney, a management consulting firm, when they looked at what are the big issues that owners are facing from a capital perspective, great things have happened is that senior management support for front-end planning has been in place, and so the pressure for that is lower as a concern. However, projects are getting more technically complex. The risk profile of those projects, because of that technical complexity, has increased, and there's been a big emphasis on making sure that project management, not just within construction execution, but throughout the entire project lifecycle, is of utmost importance for organizations. So when you think about, why do these associations and consulting firms identify what are the top conversations that leaders in the capital program process are having? It's all about making sure that there are great leaders attracted to the organization and that the talent is in-house to deliver great projects. There's big emphasis in conversations around front-end loading and planning and making sure that the plan going in is well thought out. And then you'll see a tone throughout conversations, both within the report from Accenture, but also from an industry association, the Construction Owners Association, that there's a big focus on making sure that our stakeholders are engaged in the process to reduce the impact of change that can often steer projects off course. So a lot of the teaching and learning, if you showed up at a COA conference or a CMAA conference, you'll hear about issues around making sure that the team is well equipped to deal with these big issues and making sure that that performance is a focal point for the organizations. So where that puts us today is that there's a bit of a divergent process that's happening. One is, as I mentioned, projects are increasing from a complexity perspective. They're more technical, carry more medical requirements and others to be a part of that process. However, what you also need is to deal with all of the growth. Is that you've got lots of organizations that are dealing with more projects in the year and having to deal with increased volume of projects as well as increased size of the average project. And then the last is you've got performance concerns. Those project issues that I mentioned at the start of this webinar, we've got the issues related to being late or over budget. Just if someone could mute the line, please, that would be appreciated. So good news is that for the webinars, for the projects that are happening, there are many great examples of excellence in project delivery. There are wonderful facilities that are being built, whether they're surface transportation or vertical construction. There are owners that deeply understand what is some of the key issues that they have to face and are developing strategies, or what we'll discuss, habits within their organizations that make them perform better than the rest of the pack. So in the past, if you could just think about a great leader when it comes to management consulting, there is a speaker, Stephen Covey, who coined the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. This is a great book, and if you haven't read it, I would encourage you. It's sort of an oldie but goodie. But what Stephen Covey did is he clearly defined great habits. And so what he did was he suggested that a habit is the combination of when organizations have the knowledge of what to do and why to do it, and combined with the skills, the training of how to go about doing that, and then leaders in the organization motivated the group to desire and want to do it. And when those 3 things are firmly in place, that establishes a habit, not only at a personal level, but at a cultural level in your organization. Now, eBuilder has had a wonderful opportunity to speak with many leading owners that are focused on developing these great habits. And what we've found in our research is that from a capital program perspective, that capital project habits combined when you take your procedure or your workflow process and then you combine that with excellence in training and then motivate your team from a desire perspective. So those 3 things are the critical elements to establish great habits. Now let's talk specifically about the 7 habits of highly effective projects. So across our research and as we spent time with facility owners and their project teams, what they said over and over again was critical to what they do are these 7 habits. Now, we'll be able to spend a little time digging into each of these habits, but I want to just share them with you here. So number 1, best-in-class owners have an undeniable focus on shifting from reactive to proactive. They spend most of their time thinking about what lies ahead. And that speaks directly to the idea of forecast completion. So what best-in-class owners do is that they spend a majority of their time looking at what's ahead and estimating where they're going to be when they hit key milestones. They certainly spend time looking at past performance as a predictor of the future, but they don't spend tons of cycles looking back at actual data all the time because there's no ability to impact what had already happened in the past. One of the great habits that I love is this idea of automate to operate. And let me explain that for a second. The whole idea is that we all are in a situation where we have more to do in a day than can actually get done. And owners in particular are put into a position where they have to do more with less. And so the only way to allow them to focus on the good stuff is to automate the kind of overhead burden related things that can suck the life and time out of your day. So what best-in-class owners is that they automate everything they possibly can so that they can move to a moment where they can operate in high-value areas of capital program management. Another great habit is that best-in-class owners establish win-win environments with their project teams. And what they pay special attention to are motivations and incentives that help the project team. So you'll see that owners, best-in-class owners, have a great focus of establishing not only a win for their organization, but a win for their entire project team. And then they focus on making sure that those organizations are paid quickly so that they get a win as well. You'll also see best-in-class owners spend lots of time around empathizing and adapting and overcoming. You know, this is a little bit of a take on a Special Forces military term, which is improvise, adapt, and overcome. But what best-in-class owners do is they spend time with their program managers and construction managers and look at processes they put in place, and they define what's good about it and what they can improve. And that's the empathy. They listen to the project teams, and that's a key part. Collaborate to accelerate. A great environment. If you have 100 projects in your capital program, or even 10 projects in your capital program, and they're all doing projects differently, this makes it very difficult to collaborate across the entire capital program and to accelerate delivery. So best-in-class owners have a key focus on making sure everybody on the project team is well coordinated and able to communicate seamlessly. The last, and Stephen Covey said this in a great way, he used the term sharpen the saw. So relentlessly improve is all about about a real process for looking at throughput on repetitive processes and finding ways to drive time out of them. And so they're looking at the cycle times of key processes in construction and finding ways to improve them by taking steps and days and money out of the process. So let's dig in a little bit and talk about some of the key processes that are important, or the habits, I should say, that best-in-class owners focus on. So number one, the first habit is be proactive. Here's a question for you, and this is really a culture of your organization. Do you find that within your organization you are spending most of your time looking at, talking about, meeting about traditional lagging indicators? Some, and this isn't bad. It's just it's a matter of how much time balance you spend on these things. So leading owners took a look at that and realized that they spend a lot of time looking at the monthly project performance reports, seeing actual costs, looking at actual costs in the previous month. It typically took more than 30 days for them to get the report to look back at the previous month. So oftentimes, if you were looking at January performance, it was March before you were able to have that conversation. And so there is often processes associated with looking at those project reports, trying to validate that they're accurate, looking at schedule milestones accomplished, or what the quantities installed were, or historically what the cash flow of the project was. Now, again, all important points of data to look at project performance. But what best-in-class organizations do is they spend as much time talking about leading indicators as they do lagging performance indicators. So best-in-class owners spend time and develop a culture of forecasting, of looking at historical performance to inform a conversation that says, hey, where are we going to be when we end up? What's our budget at complete? What's our estimate to complete? What's our schedule estimate to complete? And they look specifically at what the cash flow would be amidst all the changes 2 or 3 months from that day. So the takeaway here with habit 1 is that leading owners spend 50% of their time in leading indicators and 50% of their time in lagging indicators and having conversations about it. And oftentimes, a hallmark of a best-in-class owner is that they will have a forecast meeting, not the Monday morning job meeting that looks at what was done the previous week. Speaking of forecasting, that leads right to habit 2 of forecast to complete. So best-in-class owners talk about the finish line. And let me be clear about what the finish line is. As we've been able to talk and research with these leading owners, what they shared over and over again is that they never focus on construction complete as the finish line. Right, is that they're always optimizing the team around occupancy or operations or startup, right? It is a stage of the project that goes beyond when the general contractor walks off the site. So there's a hyper focus in the project plan to make sure that they're looking at and forecasting occupancy as the end of that particular project. And so, oftentimes, from an owner's perspective, they may be dealing with contractor schedules, they may be looking at their budget, and they all sort of end as the contractor ends. But best-in-class owners have their own schedule for all of the work that happens after that, and they relentlessly focus on that forecast. And so, this is a quick image of something called earned value. I don't think that earned value is necessarily the solution to everything, but what it does do is says, let's measure what our original plan was, and let's find out where we are, and use that to establish what would be an estimate to complete for the entire project life cycle. So this is a great takeaway. If there's anything you heard about on this webinar that I'd want you to take away today that you can implement tomorrow, is the idea of automate to operate. The premise is very simple, is that today, I think if we're all honest with ourselves, we spend a lot of time looking at project data, jockeying it in Excel or some other system, and then try to find ways to represent that data so that others can consume it. We're particularly familiar with the data, so we're okay with it. It's that everyone else has to understand. Back in the day, Project Management Institute estimated that a project manager's time, they spend more than 50% of their time trying to sort of work through the manual process to communicate progress. So today, a manual process is pretty low value utilization of your time. And when you're managing capital programs, you want to spend that time in the high value areas of relationship building, problem solving, coming up with alternatives. And you can't if your head's down in a spreadsheet. So what best-in-class owners do, and this is just a reporting example, but they look at every process in their capital programs and they say, gosh, is there a faster, better way that we can squeeze overhead right out of this process? So regardless of the reporting solution you may use, is that can you create it so that it gives you actionable, data-driven intelligence so that you can make decisions without having to spend the 10 hours it took to pretty up the data and make sure it's accurate. So best-in-class owners, now here's the great savings, and this is what separates best-in-class from the rest of the pack, is that they actually measure the hours saved by automating these processes, and then they take those same exact hours and then they reinvest it into intentional high-value activities. So specifically, if they can save 5 hours out of the week on manual reporting and take those 5 hours and invest it in contractor relationships, more time in design review, taking a look at alternative value engineering options, that those paid off dividends. So habit 4, win, win, and pay fast. This one is really a very practical solution. So the best way that I could describe this is that best-in-class owners establish win-win relationships with all of their contractors, their designers, and their subcontractors. But more importantly, what they do is they look at specific wins that benefit the capital program. So here's a real-world scenario. We had an opportunity to speak with a large healthcare owner, and they did something really innovative in their approach. So historically, what this healthcare owner did is they typically awarded their projects as a lump sum or guaranteed max price. So there was a fixed price associated with the delivery of a project once they got to sufficient design. What they did, because they had strategic relationships, and this was a repeat contractor that did more work, is that they extended a hand to be more collaborative. They were fair with their margins that were submitted by the contractor on the project, and made sure that that was attractive for the contractor to build their project. But what they included was a contract provision where when the general contractor took the initial estimate and went to buy out the project, instead of that buyout margin just sort of dropping to profitability for the contractor, they worked out a share model where a portion of those savings went right to risk contingency and funding against mitigation actions they would take risks established on the project. And so to reinforce that, that owner established a collaborative platform that they could share with their contractor to gain visibility into this whole process. You know, previous to this, they didn't have any visibility. The buyout was all done by the contractor, and it was not clear to them how much was saved from the buyout. So now they had great visibility. They had a fair way and an incentive for the contractor to still buy out the project, but both owner and contractor were recipients in the savings because it went into funding change orders through contingency. Excellent, excellent practice, and what this really did was create an opportunity to align owner and contractor into cost savings. Now, what they did, too, in creating the win-win, it wasn't just that the contractor got an incentive with the contingency and it funded changes. What they also focused on is streamlining the payment process. So historically, that organization could have had a typical net 30 payment process, which could drag on to net 60 and beyond in certain cases. What they were able to do is to streamline that workflow process, automate, as we talked about, and reduce that cycle time to less than net 10. In many cases, we're talking about days. So this is a 30-to-1 cycle time reduction in the process for App4Pay. And what this allowed the owner to do is to establish an impeccable reputation as a fast pay owner. And as they started up new contracts and new projects, contractors knew that they wouldn't have to burden carrying costs, and it increased the trust they had because they were sharing this information and aligned with incentives. This is about the habit of win-win, and sometimes this requires you to think outside the box so that you can align a great win-win for everyone on the project team. So habit 5, empathize, adapt, and overcome. So this one's really easy. You know, if you think back to Stephen Covey's words, you know, what he said was, seek first to understand before being understood. And those are words to live by. What owners do with this information is that they make sure that when they're taking on key initiatives that they spend and invest the time to listen to their community of stakeholders. So best-in-class owners, it's clear. What they do is they lead the PMIS strategy, so Project Management Information System. So if they're trying to create a collaborative platform in which the entire project lifecycle can be managed on a common platform, there are no better organization than the owner to establish that environment for the project team. And what they do is they often seek the advice and counsel of great construction managers or program managers. Now, owners, of course, from a risk perspective, will diversify who they award contracts to. So if you have a large capital program, it's very likely that you'll be working with tens, if not hundreds, of general contractors and large specialty contractors. And it's hard to get everyone working on the same page. So best-in-class owners have established a strategy to team with program managers that are in the marketplace, that are in a unique position to take an independent perspective. And what they do is they listen to them and they listen to the community of contractors and designers that are working on their capital programs, and they look for wins that they can incorporate into that PMIS. And so those wins are really key. So it's one thing to create wins for owners, and that's a given. Then there's another set of owners or set of wins that you can establish as rules by the program manager. But best in class separate themselves and say, we're going to make sure that there are wins like Fast Pay or other initiatives that get AEs and GCs the answers they need and the information they need to make quick decisions so that they're not burning their overhead and eating into their margin. So what's a key takeaway, and this was pounded into me, is that the owner always retains the strategy around this. They are the folks that are driving it. And so the rest of the pack allow contractors to tell them what to do when it comes to like what information an owner should receive, or they receive a report on a weekly or monthly basis on project status, and they just accept it. Best-in-class owners separate and say, no, you know what, we're paying for it all anyway, whether it's in your general conditions or it's something that we're going to run. And we want to focus on the process and the strategy for rolling it out. So habit 6. Habit 6 is all about collaborate to accelerate. And so when those best-in-class owners take that strategy and ownership around a project management information system, what they'll do is make sure that that PMIS or construction program management platform is available for the entire project team. What they do is they focus in on defining the workflow processes that integrates and binds team members and to create interdependency. That's a good thing on capital programs. So, you know, whether it's taking a look at a BIM model and using that as a way to clarify requests for information or change order requests or value engineering opportunities, what they do is they make sure that the solution that they create for the entire project team delivers value to all key stakeholders, and it optimizes the process. So there's one set of value that comes from collaborating with one another, and that's simple kind of blocking and tackling things like, are all the project documents in one place? Are all our RFIs and submittals in a place? Do we have a way to manage change order requests, and does it automatically trigger escalations if approval authorizations are higher than, you know, what a project manager can authorize? So they make sure that that's all in place first. But what they're able to do, the best-in-class organizations, is they go a step further, and it really gets into habit number 7, which is about relentlessly improving. So relentlessly improving is about getting better. And I got to tell you, in my 20-plus years working in program management in various organizations, I've heard this word continuous improvement thrown around so much it's almost meaningless. But I'll tell you that best-in-class owners take continuous improvement very seriously. So, you know, there's the picture that most organizations have of continuous improvement, which is, hey, let's do a post-mortem after the project is delivered, and we'll go around and pat each other on the back on the things that we did well, and then we'll pick a couple of opportunities and say, hey, you know, maybe we should look at that a little more. And then the next project starts and they never get to it. That's the current state of continuous improvement. However, best-in-class owners, again, they separate from that. They do something exceptional, which is they go and they look at ways to de-bottleneck workflow processes. So it takes rigor to want to go do this. I think it's simple to say, hey, what's our average cycle time for RFI turnaround? How long did it take to get a change authorized? Did we have crews in the field that were waiting for a change authorization to happen and costing us money? What best-in-class owners do is that they first establish what are the critical workflow processes in our project. And they write them down, they whiteboard them out, and then they use a technology to enable these workflow processes. And they have a special thing, a process orientation that I would attribute to a Six Sigma orientation. So if you've ever heard of organizations like GE or Motorola or many others that have that are Six Sigma certified, you'll know that there's a process called DMAIC, or define, measure, analyze, improve, and control. Those 5 steps are what best-in-class owners use to find opportunities for debottlenecking. So let me give you an example. In this particular workflow, this is a change order request process, and it's a simple one. Now, this process may be far more complex on your capital program, but for purposes of illustration, to be able to define it, you got to be able to write it down. And maybe you have this in your standard operating procedure. I've found many organizations don't at all. But once you take that piece of paper in your standard operating procedure and enable it in a technology, you're able to measure every step of the workflow process and find out the aging. How long did it sit in the inbox of the project controls person or the executive? And that gives you the measurement. The analyzing is in the business intelligence behind this. So as you work through the capital program, you might be 3 months into your 18-month project, and you're finding that you've got workflow processes that are full of friction. Analyzing that with great business intelligence allows you to take the next step, which is to improve it. Best-in-class owners analyze their performance on workflows, and then they look to take steps out of the workflow process and improve the cycle time. They don't just pound their hands on the desk and say, we need to make this move faster. They actually look to engineer it faster. And then, of course, control. Once you have a best-in-class workflow process, what they do is perpetuate this best-in-class process to all their other capital programs. So you could have a couple of different ways on different projects to manage change order requests or whatever workflow process you want, but as long as you have a step to analyze performance of those, you can then take the best of each of those projects, turn it into one really rockin', streamlined, high throughput workflow, and then roll it back out to the project team, and you're going to see tremendous gains in value. And this is the key thing. This is what feeds the whole idea of habit number 3, which is automate to operate in the high-value areas. If you can save days on each of the workflow processes, you'll find that 50% of time, a project manager's time that's spent on chasing stuff down and manually working stuff, you're going to be able to capture, and they're going to be able to invest that time with your partners. So to sum it up, the 7 habits of highly effective projects: be proactive, forecast completion, automate to operate in high values areas, create win-win environments, and pay fast. Empathize and adapt and overcome. You don't have to have every answer. You just have to have a willingness to understand first. Collaborate with one another to accelerate, and that's a lot of the foundational areas of making sure you're all on the same system, and then have a relentless desire and focus to improve. These are the 7 things that best-in-class owners do. So, great, great topics, great takeaways, but are there organizations that live these kind of habits? And of course there are. There are great owner organizations that are just, setting the world ablaze with greatness that they perform. It may be quiet, the buildings go up and students show up at University of Southern California, but I'll tell you, behind the scenes, they are achieving greatness. So USC, large organization, 15.4 million square feet of buildings. They've got thousands upon thousands of people on their campuses and are they have a $6 billion program, $1.5 billion on an annual basis. Their habits, they're focused on automate to operate, collaborate to accelerate, forecasting completion, and relentlessly improve. So they have many great habits. I just picked a few that I had learned about in getting to know USC. And what I found is that their results are astonishing. Is that USC was able to improve program management productivity by 3x. What that specifically means is that through implementing these habits, along with focusing on greatness in project controls and creating more roles in their capital program teams by adding project engineers that could offload some of the work from the program managers, they were able to increase the average construction volume that a project manager could handle by 3 times. Right, so they were faced with a huge growth objective, had to not only grow the staff but to increase productivity while doing it with new people. And they did that by rolling out great consistent procedures across their projects and focusing the capital program metrics to make sure that they had a good watch on the cash flow on a project. So USC, excellence, and a best-in-class owner. Another one that I would call out is the City of Arlington. This is out in Texas and home to the NFL Dallas Cowboys and Texas Rangers. What's really unique about the City of Arlington is that in many government organizations, what Public Works does versus transportation versus water and utilities and parks and recreation, they're all separate silos, all doing projects differently. And what they were able to do is to find a way to implement their habits of being proactive, automate to operate, and create win-win and pay fast scenarios. And they did that across each of those functional departments. So the key results, one is for the first time they were able to get true real-time unified visibility across each of the departments. They were able to streamline and leverage workflows and focus on cycle time reduction of those workflows so that it was less friction, more productivity. They did something really excellent when it comes to looking at data flow, is that they integrated their accounting system, their project management system, as well as their GIS system so that they weren't manually entering data, increasing the burden upon their team to figure this all out. It was great data integration that streamed the right kind of information so they could make great decisions. City of Arlington, best-in-class owner. probably one of my favorite stories, Banner Health. So one of the largest nonprofit health systems in the United States. They're a big employer in Arizona, big capital program. So again, you know, excellence isn't always in just size, right? Any size owner can implement these 7 habits and achieve these kinds of results at their scale. So Banner Health, you know, multi-billion-dollar capital program, and what their big focus on was forecast to completion, automate to operate, and empathize, adapt, and overcome. One of the great things that Banner Health was able to do was to focus on the whole idea of forecasting and contingency utilization. So in this owner organization, they developed a cadence where there was unknowns. We made sure there was contingency funds to cover the unknowns. Smart thing to do. However, as they got more effective at forecasting completion and getting precision around their scope, they were able to see that not all of the contingency funds were needed in the projects. And when you're looking across $1.8 billion of capital programs, small amounts of contingency that you can recapture start to add up to a lot. They did that and were able to find contingencies that weren't needed to cover risks, able to leverage $70 million in savings from those active projects to fund a brand new life-saving facility that the marketplace needed. So Banner Health created efficient cost forecasting and eliminated the chance of surprise overruns, got confident in that data, and were able to recapture money that could start a new project. Right? That is a best-in-class owner. So we'd like to take this time to switch it over to questions and answers. You'll find that in the GoToWebinar panel, there on the bottom side, you'll find an area where you can ask questions. And so I'm just going to send that out to you. Please feel free to enter your questions, and we'll take as many as we can for the time we have remaining.
Okay, thank you, Chris, and thank you, everybody who's joined us. Keep those questions coming in, and I'm going to read them out as we go through. And if we don't have time to get to all the questions, we can always follow up with you afterwards. But let's see. Okay, so Chris, first question. A couple of slides back, you mentioned USC and the 3 times productivity savings. The question is, how specifically did USC achieve 3 times productivity from their project managers?
Yeah, so one of the things that that USC would certainly share with you is this whole idea of the situation that they're in. Their capital program was an audacious goal, $6 billion over several years to grow the university into a preeminent research and a graduate and undergraduate facility. They literally see their mission as creating the future life-saving medications that are going to save lives and save the environment, and they do it. What's really important about their productivity focus was that given the growth that they were going to have and the volume of projects that was coming into the system and were funded, that they not only needed to get better at how they manage the projects, but to deal with that volume. So they had an aggressive growth goal of adding project managers to deal with that, but you couldn't onboard them fast enough to handle all the projects. So their focus on improving their processes was really around training, getting them ready, and then distributing the work and optimizing everything that they could. So USC implemented this concept of having a more centralized project controls organization that would help to define what are the great processes and procedures that the organization would do, and then train up their program managers and project managers to do it in a consistent way, but also to provide them with extra help. So rather than creating all the burden on the project manager, they were able to add project engineers and project control engineers and contract administrators and other staff that could handle some of the project management monitoring and give that project manager more time back in their day. What that resulted in is, I can't remember the exact numbers, but if an average project manager could manage several $1 million worth of projects at any given time across a couple of projects, then they could triple that same result through these changes.
Okay. Great. Next question from one of our other participants is, on continuous improvement, what specific steps can be taken? E.g., is it looking at historical data? Is it improving processes? I guess, how do I go about starting a continuous improvement program within my capital program?
Yeah, great question. So one of the first things that best-in-class owners do is that they let go of the idea that the only time to do process improvement is after a project is complete. That just in and of itself says a lot. So something that you can implement right away tomorrow is to take a process that's full of friction and to make sure that it's adequately defined. Oftentimes owners will find that that process, the reason why it's full of friction is that it's not adequately defined. But if it is, then make sure you find a way to measure and analyze the performance against that procedure. Oftentimes it is helpful to have a technology platform to help you to do that. So best-in-class owners look for construction program management platforms that have a flexible workflow process that allows them to model what they have in their standard operating procedures and to measure that. If you don't have that today, that's okay. You just have to take a little bit of a manual process for measurement. But the important thing is, if you find that process that's full of friction, don't wait to the end of the project. Do it now. You can jump on it, and oftentimes you'll find that it's a big win for the project team. It creates a lot of goodwill within the team that is executing your project, and will get time back in everyone's day.
Okay. Next question is, how do you get consensus from other departments that are not using a best-in-class system like eBuilder?
Yeah, so consensus driving is certainly one of the important parts to getting an initiative started. So I think that best-in-class owners, what they first do is they characterize their current landscape really well. They're brutally honest with themselves to define what is it that is working well and what doesn't. So depending upon where you sit in the organization, if you're from a contractor and you're wishing that an owner would sort of clean up their act and get with the program and collaborate, then I think that part of the process is to just help educate the owner about what could be done. So much of the world in construction is still run by Excel. It doesn't need to be. So that's one side. if you're in an owner organization and you see you catch the vision and see the light of what could be, then what this is about is sharing successes and case studies of others, peers like you in the marketplace that build similar things, and talking about ways that that can improve. So I find that that program management firms are a great source of that information. Technology providers like eBuilder can be a great source of that information. But don't forget CMAA or COAA or CII as industry associations that can help you benchmark what best in class could look like.
Okay, we had a related question, which I think you've kind of answered with your last two, I guess, but maybe there's something you want to add to it. I guess the question comes from, if you don't have a best-in-class system right now, what's the best, like where do you start? What's the best approach to discover what's in use for sort of workflows, business processes, data flows, etc., across a large organization, so that presumably you can identify gaps and develop kind of a roadmap of where you want to go forward? Where do you start with all of that is the question.
Yeah, great question. So depending upon the organization that you're in, you may find, especially if you're in a larger organization, that there are internal document management systems or perhaps some sort of workflow engine that exists within your enterprise. And certainly understanding how that's used within your organization is a place to start. One of the things that most owners find in those processes is that those systems are inherently single organization systems. They are the enterprise solution for one enterprise. So what most owners have found is that they really need something that is outside and in the cloud, so that other owners or other contractors and partners that they work with to deliver the capital programs can access the system safely and don't have to fight with IT to get them credentials through the firewall and to get to that. So I think a good place to start is a little inventory of what's being used within the capital programs team. The next would be, are there other systems within the enterprise that are being used? But then I would spend time looking out in the marketplace and looking specifically for a project management information system that is designed uniquely for the entire project lifecycle and includes key elements like workflow, business intelligence, and supports design processes for the future like building information models.
Great. We still have time for a couple more questions, I think. I like this question. This is a very direct question, clearly from somebody in a leadership position. The question is, how do I get my people to follow these habits?
What a great question. So, for that, I am going to just get back for a second to, I think, the slide that really says it all in terms of implementing great habits. So I think the foundational part of living these habits is first creating the definition of a habit in your capital program organization. So it's important from a leadership perspective that not only do you have the knowledge of what to do and why to do, and this was a start of that conversation, but that your team be given time to develop the skills and that you find ways to motivate your organization and to give them desire. So without these foundational things, these habits are often hard to reach. That's why there is a group of owners that I would call best in class, is that they have figured out the secret sauce to get to the root of what it takes to get them done. So what we're going to do to help you with that is that you'll see from eBuilder a series of webinars over the next couple of months where we'll give you an opportunity to attend a webinar and to hear directly from the owners, organizations, about how they rolled out their great habits. So you can stay tuned with us. We'll help share that information. Check our blog. We'll go much deeper and do deep dives on specific habits and case studies around the habits. So you'll see more information there. If you're an executive leader at an owner, keep a lookout. We'll be hosting an executive breakfast series sometime in the spring where we'll be talking about these and other foundational leadership issues that impact owners.
Thanks. The next question I think has to do with the kind of slides you were going through at the beginning of the presentation, Chris, about the state of the construction market. And the question is, has eBuilder come across any research or heard from any clients about difficulties in finding the right people, particularly since the construction workforce is aging over time?
That's a great question, and a big focus of a study that we're launching here in the next couple of weeks. One of the things that we heard from owner organizations as a top concern in 2016 is about talent acquisition, talent retention, and how to create environments for that high caliber talent to succeed in their organizations. So that's a webinar. In fact, that's a seminar in and of itself, and we certainly would be. You'll see us talk about those issues, but I think a practical thing to take away. And the message I'd land to any leader who is trying to bring in talent is do a quick self-assessment by asking a simple question in your organization. Do you create and deliver a productive, high output environment for that talent to jump on when they come into the organization? If we go out and attract a senior level, experienced program or project manager and we're lucky enough to land them in our organization, do we bring them onto the team, throw an Excel spreadsheet at them and say good luck? Or do we say, hey, we have a process, we manage it, we measure it, we've created an environment where all of your processes that you have to deal with day in and day out, much of it is automated. Best-in-class owners get a disproportionate share of talent because they've created a environment, culture, and technology platform that allows people to be highly productive and achieve exceptional results. Great talent is attracted to that, and great talent on the flip side runs away from organizations that say, sure, we know what we're doing, but it's all on you, good luck.
All right, great. I think we're out of time. There were one or two questions that we either didn't get to or somebody may have left before we were able to get to the questions. So we'll be following up with those folks afterwards. But for now, I'll hand back to Ashley.
Yes, and I want to thank everybody for joining us today. We will be sending out the recording and the presentation later on this week, so keep an eye out for that. And as Richard mentioned, we will follow up with you if we did not get around to answering your question. So with that, Chris and Richard, thank you very much. And
thank you, everyone.
We will keep you posted on our upcoming webinars.